The other part is the health component, where we're trying to get them to not get food, but to grow their own food. Because the one thing we said, we're not going to help people to stay dependent on an organization. And that I found with my previous organization, that as much as we've done good work, we've kept people poor and we've kept people dependent. And it's the way charitable organizations are structured, because we sell poverty. You know, that is how we get donations. So my name is Ingrid. Thank you, Jakub, and thank you, UWC, and everyone who made this possible for me to share. I grew up in a small town called Piketberg, and we used to have like 8,000 people in the whole community, so everyone knew everyone. And from there, I went to school. I grew up with a single mother and 3 sisters, so I only had women in my family. And from there, I went to university. I tried to go to University of Stellenbosch. I did 1 year of BSc, and then we ran out of money. So I had to go and find a job, and I got a job at one of the garages in Piketberg, cleaning cars, cleaning toilets, I think at that age, I thought that would make enough money for registration the next year, which it didn't, because from that money I had to buy food as well. And my mum was in a lot of debt. So that also then covered some of the debts as well. So I never made it back to university. But I got a job and in a charity as a receptionist of Lawyers for Human Rights. And I worked my way up from there and finally became the office manager in Stellenbosch. And then until one of my directors, or the national director at the time, said that he can't pay me what I'm worth because I'm not a lawyer. And so that encouraged me to start studying law.
All right. So, yes, ladies and gentlemen, we're also sitting today in Piketberg. So, Ingrid has her own firm here in Piketberg. So, there's only 2 petrol stations, so I might know which petrol station she's talking about. But more on a more serious note, so after that early attempt to get into university, then you decided you're going to enroll with UNISA in 2002. So why law? Because it seems that it's a calling for you, because we're sitting today in your own practice and firm.
Why law? I had a long journey to try and find money to get a degree, because when I was growing up, I decided I want a degree come what may. Doesn't matter what degree, I just wanted a degree. So I had a long journey in terms of working together with my mother in a local advice office in Piketberg, which she started. And there I saw farm workers coming to the office. And of course, the advice offices didn't have a lawyer. So we had to phone Lawyers for Human Rights. We had to phone UWC Law Clinic. I was involved in street law. So I was always exposed to the good side of lawyers and the people with the hearts to help people. And so when my director said at the time that he's not going to pay me what I'm worth, even though I was managing lawyers, I decided I may as well then study law. But it was mainly because I saw the farm workers coming to the office and coming back and back and back and not being helped. So I think that sort of like helped me to understand that there's more to law than just making money. You can actually help people. And the examples that I've had, lucky to have in my growing up, seeing how people have driven from, and these are lawyers driving from Stellenbosch, from Cape Town, to come and help and be with us while we were assisting the farm workers who couldn't even read and write, who couldn't didn't understand anything what was happening. I remember one time in Piketberg, there was farm workers who were evicted, and just before Christmas, their water was cut off, and it was scorching hot. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, so how are these people going to get through this heat, let alone Christmas? And there was the one lawyer who drove all the way from Cape Town to come and go with us to the police station. And she quoted the act. And at that time, Esther was still very new, and the police officers didn't understand it. And she helped us. And I saw there the law in action, helping people who couldn't defend themselves. And that really was a seed that was born inside of me. And I think I must have been like 19 years old. And since then, I wanted to become a lawyer to not necessarily only make money, but also more so to help those who can't talk for themselves, who don't understand how the law can help them, and hopefully encourage through that more lawyers to come out to rural communities and not just go from rural communities after you've graduated and after you've been admitted as an attorney, but to come back to our own communities and to come and share our skills and our knowledge and our wisdom to try and I suppose, end poverty, because it can make a contribution. And that's sort of along the way what I started to understand, how alive the law can be, if you direct it in the right direction.
So then you also decided that you want to. So you started at UNISA. Many of the people on the podcast that I have so far, their undergraduate degree didn't start with UNISA. So UNISA is from my point of view, is a little bit harder because there's a little bit more to balance. So please take us through that journey of UNISA, completing your undergrad degree with UNISA.
So when I started in 2002, I could only select a university that I could afford at the time. And UNISA was affordable because it was lower in cost. I didn't have to travel. I could write the exam in Piketberg. And I then at the time worked for Lawyers for Human Rights. Shortly after that, I resigned and I started working for a charity, which I thought would be easier to help me in terms of finishing. But it was much harder because I got involved in a project I developed a project for young people and rural young people in particular. And the kind of person that I am, I got stuck into that. So I got busier in terms of the work at the charity. And at the same time, I had to finish 40 modules, which was a lot of modules. So instead of taking 4 years, I took 8 years to finish my degree. And that was mainly because I had a program, I had to develop a program that this country has never seen, that eventually became well known as the World Health Organization, seeking after it. And at the same time, I had to remind myself that if the charity runs out of money, what's going to happen to me? So it was that drive within myself that continued to help me to become disciplined in studying. I've had, sort of very long hours. I had to work long hours, sometimes up until midnight, doing youth programs, facilitating school holiday programs, and then come back and study as well. So I study up until about 3-4 o'clock in the morning. And then I had 3 hours of sleep. And this was I've done it for the last 23 years because I've studied for a long, long, long time, and a total of 23 years so far. And, it's, I think one of the secrets is, or my secrets is, I've done judo all my life. And, in doing any form of martial arts, it helps you with discipline and it helps you to focus. So if things around you and within you are not so well, It's, that discipline that you learn. And I've done it since I was 6 years old, and I got into it merely because I struggled to deal with my mum and dad's divorce at the time and what was going on. And I found with judo, it kept me focused, it kept me disciplined. And I think that's a big part of the reason why I could, after a youth program, go back to my books and study.
Right. But you didn't stop at the undergrad degree. So after completing your undergrad degree, you decided also, look, I'm not done yet. I would like to do a master's. So you decided to do a master's in taxation law. Why? Because your journey so far tells a story of someone that's so passionate about human rights. So in most cases, that's where you want the story to go. But then you decided taxation and tax law is where you would like to specialize. So why tax and tax law?
Well, the question of why tax law is a very good question, because when I was sitting after having done my LLB, I sat and thought, what would be most helpful to a community like Piketberg and to a community like a farming community? I am the kind of person who doesn't do what people tell me to do. I like to ask why. Why is it that it is the way that it is? And the mere fact that a lot of Black attorneys never go into tax law and conveyancing and notary. And those were fields of law that I didn't understand when I was doing my LLB. I knew what it was, obviously, but I didn't know how to use it. And there was this big drive inside of me to want to use whatever I do and specialize in for the greater good of the community. And as I was doing my work, because I've done the master's as well while working, so it wasn't, I never had any time in my life where I was just, apart from school, where I could just concentrate on education alone. So I'd never had that luxury. In fact, I've just started with my LLD as well, also through UNISA. So, I wanted to see how far I can go academically, because I've never had that opportunity straight from school. And as much as I'm trying to help other people reach their full potential, I've also been very clear about myself that I need to do the same, because I don't want to become resentful to other people achieving far more than I have. And in order to do so, I just keep on studying, and keep on seeing where is my potential. So taxation for me, a lot of our community people never do e-filing. They never, they start family trusts, for example, and they don't know what the tax benefits or disadvantages may be in it. And that's partly the reason why I wanted to specialize in tax. Also, my topic was on the tax implications for public benefit organizations. And that was merely because I was managing a public benefit organization myself at the time. And always the question that comes up is, can you trade, to generate an income to sustain your programs? And it's a well-known fact that nonprofits and charitable organizations are really struggling when you only rely on donations. And unfortunately, social entrepreneurship is not recognized in our country, in our laws, etc. Not yet. But, if it was, it would have been an easier journey for nonprofits. And I wanted to write a simple document that's understandable for anybody to pick it up, who runs an NGO, to be able to read through it and understand what the tax implications for their organizations are, but also what the benefits are. So that they can then, if you are, for example, VAT registered, you can claim back the VAT and your money can go so much further. And those are simple things that people don't understand out there. Also, they mix the different entities. So they say, oh, I'm a non-profit and therefore I don't have to pay tax. you still have to become registered or approved as a public benefit organization, and you still have to file your organization's tax returns every year, even though you are exempted. So those were it was more to educate our community. And I'm doing a doctorate now in terms of looking again at the non-profit sector, but looking at the tax implications in during a state of disaster. Because we've gone through COVID, we are seeing so many different disasters happening on a provincial level, on a national level, and we don't know, maybe in future again on an international level. And during this time, South African government is coming up with very ad hoc solutions. And it's almost like they're doing crisis management all the time. So I'm hoping that through my doctorate, I can come up with a guideline for SARS and for our government, so that we don't have to do crisis management and we don't have to push aside non-profit organizations like we've done through COVID, or like they've done through COVID, but to include them, because they're not only helping on a social level, but they're also helping on an economic level, because it's the third sector that's employing people as well. And I think as South Africa, we forget that, because we always think of the non-profit sector as a social and sort of like a soft sector that makes no contribution to the economy. But if you really look at it, it does make a substantial contribution, and which means then tax law comes into play. And if you don't educate the people within that sector, they will make mistakes, and those mistakes will be punished because they didn't know. And that's really why I chose. But also, there's not a lot of women in it. There's not a lot of women of color in it. And I'm hoping that if more young attorneys being admitted, start to see and start to hear of my firm and what I do, but also the charitable work that I do, that they will be encouraged to study in that field as well.
Let's shift our attention to the charitable work that you're doing. So let me just get the date right here. So in 2017, you took over the Middelpos farm, but you took over as the director of the Middelpos farm project. So let's talk about that. How did you turn the project there? Behind, I have a little bit of background information, so I know you turned the project around, and that the project was not where it is today. It's an amazing project. So please tell us more about the project, and how did you turn it to success where it is today?
So I was working for another charity at the time, and I worked for them for 17 years. Building up and developing a rural youth program, and which was then globally recognized. And I thought, after 17 years, what else can I do? Because I've set this up, we've replicated it in 16 different communities, and I'm not a maintainer of a program. I'm more like a pilot person who starts something and then hand it over to other people and build the capacity in return for that as well. So I could find myself getting bored and trying to find the next project because they had enough funding. They had not just 1 year funding, they had like 5 year funding, and funders came back and back and back. So I felt there was no need for me to be there anymore. And at that time, I was working with 16,000 young people whom I was personally facilitating youth programs and youth leadership, etc. So they were running their own show. And I felt it's a good time to then leave. During that time, I went to the Minister of Rural Development to request him to buy Middelpos farm, because some of the young people whom I was working with, they were born on that farm. And the farm came onto the market. And we know the story of South Africa when farms come onto the markets in really nice areas like the Riebeek Valley. Your lifestyle people are wanting to buy it from Joburg and all these other places. So your wealthy people are, sort of like seek after those properties. And I knew that if that were to happen, then I asked the question, what would happen to the families? Because most of them wouldn't find work on the farm, which means most of them would have been asked to leave. So I asked the Minister of Rural Development at the time, Minister Nkwinti, to buy the farm, and that was in 2012. So he went ahead, his department, and they bought it. And so when I left my previous organization, I was asked by the families not to leave and come back to Piketberg, but to help them develop the farm. So I became the managing director of the farm. I'm not a beneficiary of the farm. I'm merely there to assist them and train them in the role of directors of their own company, to understand the legal processes of the Companies Act, but to also help them to use that company and the money, the profit that they will make one day, not only to drive fancy cars, but to give half of that, to plow half of that back into community. And so my agreement with them is not to earn a salary from what I do with them, but that when the time comes and they declare dividends, that they will use 50% of that dividends to plow back into the community work, whether it's education, whether it's judo programs, but that they assist other communities. Because I think that they are quite lucky, to have the kind of capacity helping them. Not that I brag or anything, but I think, by doing that, they will be in a better position to use that farm. Also, it is part of a land reform program. And we all know that the land reform programs in South Africa hasn't worked. Most of them have failed. And the argument from government is that farms are given to people to make money. And my experience in terms of the Middelpos farm project is that if you have people who come from the DOP system, who come from a system where today they are alcoholics, it's not that easy to take a farm and to turn it around. So you have to undo what the past has done. And a lot of that was not done by choice. And I think that's a fact that people are shying away from because, you want to keep the peace. But I think it's important to say that. And that's the core reason why these farms are failing, because most of them haven't seen the inside of a school. Now they are expected to read a balance sheet. If government normally appoints a strategic partner to assist these farm workers, and normally the strategic partner is somebody who has farmed but failed on his. And my question is always like, so how is this farmer going to do anything different on this farm and assist people to make this farm, to grow this farm into its fullest potential? So when I started in 2017, I started not as a farmer. I didn't know anything of farming. I knew a bit of olive farming in my previous job, but I didn't know anything what to do with this farm. But I worked with the families and I wanted them to come up with what they wanted to do with the farm. And that journey took us about 3-4 years to try and get anything out from them. And now today we have a model which is situated within land reform, where you've got people who used to be drunk on the streets are now not showing up for work on a Monday after pay weekend or SASSA grants, etc. These are the same people now who are showing up at work, who are not staying out of work, who don't come up with any excuse not to work. And they are a lot more productive than what they used to be. And what's interesting is that their children who come from school in the afternoon see working parents. And we are particularly focused on women. We're not excluding men in total, but we are focusing on women because the women on farms don't own any property. I mean, nobody does except the farmer. But when houses are allocated, it gets allocated to men. And men get work on farms easier than women. Women have to do the seasonal work, which means that women stays in that cycle of poverty. So today we've got 100 women working in the project. And when I say work, it's mainly to upskill themselves. So a lot of them are in their early 20s, a lot of them are in their early 30s, some of them are in their 60s as well. And these are people who never got the opportunity to go to school. Those who did get the opportunity to go to school didn't finish. So one of our main focus is to try and get them back into education. Because, you know, it's just thinking about my own experience. If I didn't finish a degree, if I didn't finish school at the time, if I didn't have an education, it would have been a much more heavier and a road full of more struggles than what I am experiencing. So education does open doors. And that's really, so today we farm olives. We make our own olive oil. We make our own table olives. We also do grow vegetables, organic vegetables, which we sell to different families. You know, in Cape Town, we do deliveries on Fridays. We deliver to Spa in Malmesbury. And we also have a couple of sheep. somebody came all the way from Oudtshoorn and he said, I've got 5 sheep to give to you. And at the time we needed money. And I thought, what am I going to do with sheep? But we Googled, I mean, all of the farming that we know, we Googled, and through that we did training with a woman, and they have a lot of experiences themselves. They've got a lot of knowledge which is overlooked when you appoint a strategic partner who knows about farming. I have found in the sector it's very men-driven. When the surrounding farmers saw women driving tractor on the farm, when they saw women fixing pipes on the farm, they were like a bit, you know, they can't do this quite right. Let me go and come and help. But then when they start seeing how the women are, you know, sort of just putting themselves out there, how they're developing, how they're growing, I think there's a lot of respect that we've received from them for the last certainly for the last year or so. So in actual fact, what Middelpos Farm is trying to do is to say, we hope, you know, later on we can say to government, come and look at Middelpos and come and look at what women are doing in the farming sector, because we've gone from primary agricultural activities to now going into agro-processing. And we have, we're lucky to have UWC, for example, who are helping us with, you know, different things in terms of tracking our products, for example, helping us to work out the price. You know, because for us it's difficult to work out a price and for the families themselves as well, the women in particular, it's very difficult, because how do you go from having nothing, being told that you are nothing, that you're worth nothing, to having to ask somebody for a price on your hands and what you've produced. So it's a lot about changing that mindset, that from I'm not good enough to I am good enough, and this is a quality product. We also have a bit of grapes that we sell to a winemaker, and that winemaker scores 97 out of 100. You know, so it's good quality products. And I wanted to help the women and the staff who work in the project. I wanted them to understand that although the buildings look poor, although the farm needs a lot of work, because the farm dates back to the 1800s, you know, it's one of the oldest Cape Dutch farms in the country. Although it looks poor, it doesn't mean that we have to produce poor products. We don't want a situation where people feel sorry for us and then buy our products. We want a situation where the products are, you know, people are running after it. They are saying that if I need to use olive oil, I want to use Middelpos's olive oil. And that journey took us about 5-6 years to change the mindsets in the woman. And now we've reached a stage where we are renovating one of the buildings on Middelpos Farm into an agro-processing factory. And University of Western Cape has introduced us to University of Missouri in the States as well. So eventually our products will be available globally. And that's thanks to the help of, mostly UWC and people who are like-minded and want to see land reform work in this country. Our approach is from bottom up. And I think that's the difference that it makes. It's not top down, and it's not from somebody who's an experienced farmer. So I learn as much as the women learn. And I always say to them, I'm not a farmer, you are the farmer. Because if you look at all the farms in our country, you've done that. And to remind them of that, I think is important. And that helps them to feel better about themselves and to also then produce something that is of quality.
Amazing. You know, what you made me realize is that value, that self-value, that so many women of color doesn't have, where they're treated worthless, and then at one point suddenly you're owning things and you have to ask people a price. One of the saddest moments in my life was when I saw Auntie Grietjie van Garis, I think his surname is Adams, in a taxi, sold one of her albums for R5.
Sure.
And it was not long ago. I think it was 2 or 3 years before she passed. I think that for me was quite heartbreaking, because there is no sense of value, or she doesn't know the value of it, and everybody's singing her songs, and she's been on stages all over the world, but when she has to make that price, it's for us R5. So thank you for doing it. Thank you for introducing women, especially women of color, to that level of value and self-value, because putting a value on a product starts by valuing the labor that you put into it first. So thank you very much for that. But in 2017, you also started another NPO, Inspire Children and Youth. Tell us more about that and what that specific NPO tried to achieve.
So in 2017, I started a non-profit organization called Inspire Children and Youth, and it was very difficult to come up with a name. But I thought to myself that if there's one thing that is very difficult to teach and difficult to have, is inspiration. If you don't feel like getting up in the morning, you've got to inspire yourself, on days that you don't feel to get up. When you work in an environment that, like the legal environment is not nice most of the time. It's very harsh, it's very fast. You've got to find that inspiration. And that's why I thought that if I were to work with children and youth and continue to work with them, I would like to help them feel inspired and also help them to inspire others. Because if we've got, and I was thinking rural communities, farming communities, if we can find inspiration, those of us who come from these areas will return, because there will be something there to return to. But the unfortunate part is that, just in terms of my work of line at the time, there was no job for me to return to. So I've got this huge dream of trying to revitalize, if that's the right word, bring life to our rural communities, but also offer opportunities to those of us. Because I'm sure that if we could choose, we would not want to be in the cities. I just take it from me in terms of, coming from a small town where everyone knows everyone, etc., etc. You are bound to return. And I've seen it so many times where people have worked outside the town and gone to different places, different cities, but they return in their old age. So I thought to myself, I don't want to return in my old age. I want to return, and I want to have other people return as well. I've recently had a intern from UWC who's in her second year law student. And I was chatting to her about her plans for the future. And she immediately said she wants to work for a law firm in Cape Town. And again, that made me think as to how do we structure our law firms and how do we encourage other attorneys to come back to our smaller rural communities, so that there are opportunities for, people who are studying at different universities to do their articles, because it's not that easy anymore to find articles. And it's, even harder in rural communities because they can only take so many at a time. So I think, for me, it was that whole sense of how do we inspire others? How do I keep myself inspired as well to continue to do the work? And based on that, we chose the name Inspire Children and Youth. It's a registered trust, charitable trust. It's also registered as a PBO, public benefit organization. It's got all the registrations. But also, I think that the bottom line of it is to create safe spaces for, and our focus is mainly on farm children, because I think there's a lot of services, or there are some services in rural communities, but there's nothing on farms. And also, it's much more expensive to do any project on a farm, because the transport costs is much higher for much fewer children. So you're not talking about 10,000, 16,000 children. You're talking about maybe, if you're lucky, 50 children. But you may need R1 million to do so. Whereas in a town setting, for example, you get 15,000 children easily. But you could do it for 500,000. And that's the difference in terms of cost in, doing it on farms and doing it in rural communities. And also, I've had prior to that 17 years of experience with rural farms, and both in towns, both in on farms as well. And I wanted to continue to build the capacity of young people. So our focus is mainly on children from the youngest age possible. So our youngest one is 3 years old. And then from there up until 18 years old. And we have another section which is working with women. So we decided that we can't just work with the children, because the children go home to adults, and if they don't develop, they're going to become resentful towards their children. And we've seen so many times that teenagers are being taken out of school at the age of 16 because they can now work on the farm. And that cycle needs to break, because even farms, for them to be productive, you need educated people. You need people to be able to read orders. You need people to take a telephone order. And in order to do that, we need to build the capacity. We're not necessarily saying that the children will leave, that they must leave to have a better opportunity. We want to bring life into these rural communities. But in order to do that, we need to capacitate. So our focus is education. We've got after-school support programs where children come from school with a school bus, and then they come to Middelpos Farm, and we help them with their homework. We also identify where they are struggling in terms of different school subjects, and then we provide additional support to them. Now, interesting thing, we work mainly with fetal alcohol syndrome, or spectrum disease as they call it now, children. The schools have written these children off. There's 74 of them in our program, and this is now in 2017. They have received below average marks, and I'm talking about below 20%. So nowadays you can't get zero anymore. And we have managed in the last couple of years, let's say 6 years, we've managed to get the school average up from 20% to between 60 and 80%. And these are fetal alcohol spectrum disease, malnourished, abused children, etc., where professionals have said it can't be done. What we've done is repetitive activities. Now, you remember those activities, those games that we played, the hikey, where you put the stones in the hole and you have to take it 1 by 1 or 2 by 2. And that's how you learn maths. That's how we learned maths. And those are the activities that we are using with the children on the farms. And it seems to be working. So my big, big dream is to one day have an outdoor education facility where we can take all these games and all the things that have worked for us to help us concentrate in school and do well at school, to help these children as well. Because I think, it's for them, it's a sentence, a negative thing to go to school, because they can't sit still for a long period. They can't concentrate for a long period, and yet they are requested to do so at school. So that's the one part. The other part is the health component, where we're trying to get them to not get food, but to grow their own food. Because the one thing we said, we're not going to help people to stay dependent on an organization. And that I found with my previous organization, that as much as we've done good work, we've kept people poor and we've kept people dependent. And it's the way charitable organizations are structured, because we sell poverty. That is how we get donations. And there's a fine line between that and wanting to really end poverty. And I think unless your mindset is to really end poverty, and for me, I'm lucky because I've come from poverty, I wouldn't want to have any child experience the humiliation that I've experienced as a welfare child in school. I mean, those days, the teachers made you stand up. If your welfare form wasn't filled in, and then they shouted out, why has your mum not filled this in? So everyone knew you were the welfare child, and those kinds of humiliation stays with you for the rest of your life. And that's the kind of humiliation that we don't want for the children. We don't want for the women, and we don't want for anybody who's a beneficiary of our project. And that's why we say to them, be the best that you can be, and we are there to support you. And we see ourselves as midwives, preparing for this birth within rural communities, on farms, and the new capacity. And the secret to our success, I would like to believe, is judo, because I started teaching judo to this group of farming children, and because nothing else worked. We had after-school programs, we had all these wonderful programs, and nothing worked. Their marks remained the same until we started introducing judo to them. And then they fell in love with the sport. But also from that, they learned discipline. They learned all sorts of values in terms of respecting one another, respecting your opponent, not just trying to win, but to have a good time on the mat as well. And I think those are important lessons for children and young people. Also, with judo, you make mistakes. And the learning of mistakes is very important, and to be okay with mistakes. Those are very important lessons for children and young people, because if we don't learn it at an early age, and unfortunately our households are of such a nature that people are saying, but you have to be the best, you're in competition all the time. And I remember from when I was in school, it doesn't matter if I got 100% in a subject, my mum would always say, you can do better. I go like, what is better than 100%? But that's the environment that most of us grow up in. And so when you make the first mistake, say for example, as a teenager, you become pregnant. It's a huge thing for yourself and for your family. And that's why we see suicides amongst teenagers and so forth. And in order to prevent that and prevent the shame that comes with making mistakes, I think it's important to teach that. And that's what we do in Inspire Children and Youth. And then they grow their own vegetables, not only to feed themselves, but also to feed the elderly people on the farms. Because people come and they say, we have nothing to offer. We can't contribute anything. And I say, but you've got hands, you've got feet, you've got a brain, you can think. If you use that, then you can change your own community. So we've got these 3-year-olds with the biggest spades, digging in the garden, growing their own food, eating from it, but also selling it. So these little ones are becoming entrepreneurs from a very, very young age, raising their own money for their judo project. And that is really the philosophy as to what we do. The women, just shortly, they learn skills like sewing, agro-processing, basic farming, design and printing, and we're trying to build the full value chain so that we don't have to go to different markets, but each woman can start their own business and they can buy from each other. And that's really the whole sort of like ethos with which we work.
Right. Fascinating listening to you. One of the things that really is personal to me is the story about the life on the farm, life in rural areas, and the kind of sometimes of systemic neglect that is all around. And it's amazing that you decided to be the catalyst in this particular project, and and I hope that the model on this particular farm is being built, and will be able to duplicate and reproduce in its own specific ways, across South Africa. So thank you for that, especially focusing on women and children. And I want us to, briefly spoke about the next 100 years, the next 30 years, or 30 years coming up of democracy, and what we can do in future. So the next 100 years for women, in law, will it be better?
Well, we can only hope, if we don't have hope, then what do we have? I would want it to be better, especially for young girls coming into the profession. For me as a woman, having come into the profession, it wasn't easy and hasn't been easy thus far. And then owning your own law firm is even, I found out recently, some people are saying that it's impossible because you need lots of money to start a firm. I started the firm with nothing. I had been working for charity all my life, and so I had nothing to, but I just started. I trained as a conveyancer, I trained as a notary as well, and that really helped me to start off the firm. I think there's a lot of room for training within the legal profession in terms of just understanding the different fields of law. Because when we start out studying, you hear bits and pieces about the actual profession, and it's a lot more theoretical than practical. So I only started learning, what the law is and what the law really is when I started doing practice. Because practice is not the same as what we are reading in our books at all. It's so far removed. But for me, it would be nice to see more women on the benches. It would be nice to see more women magistrates. It would be nice to see more women owning their own law firms as well. But it also would be nice to see women training organizations who are helping women within the law. I mean, if you just look at the Maintenance Act, I've spoken to a woman the other day, and she's gone back for the last 8 years to maintenance court. And that made me think of my own experience of my own mother, and then my father rocking up with old invoices, and I couldn't believe that after all these years, women are still going through the same trauma, because it's traumatic for the woman, but also for their children. So I would like to see women activists within the legal profession tackling those things, like I am trying to tackle tax law, within the non-profit sector, and conveyancing also, it's a profession or a field of law that many women don't do, and many women of color don't even know of, unless you know somebody who is doing it. So in actual fact, I think if we were to get a better experience for us as women in the next 100 years, we need to grow examples. We need to grow new capacity. We need to strengthen the capacity that's already there. Some of the examples that I've seen in the human rights sector, for example, are people who are giving so much, of themselves. And I'm one of them. You give so much. But then, sort of like before you have to retire, you're already tired. And you remain tired because you keep on giving. And so when I entered the profession, I thought to myself, what is it that I want to receive back from it? And for me, that's probably part of the reason why I keep on studying, why I keep on doing research, why I keep on reading. And one of the key things that lawyers always say to you is they don't have time, And I've realized that, yes, there's not a lot of time in one's day, but if we can learn from each other, the storytelling, I would so much want to go and sit with an older attorney and just talk, not talk about cases, not talk about anything, but just talk about her experiences and learn from that. So that whole old age, transition of knowledge through storytelling, I think that's the part that is missing, that I find missing within in the legal profession. So apart from judges, apart from magistrates, apart from people in key professions or key areas within the legal profession, I think as women, there's the human aspect that we can't deny. As much as we want to, sort of like act like a man and act all hard and hardy, and sometimes that's necessary in some of the fields and some of the areas that you are working. But I think if we keep the human aspect and the caring aspect, then things like gender-based violence, things like maintenance, for example, divorces, will become a lot more bearable for women who are suffering and who have been suffered for years. Because for me, it is unacceptable that a woman have to go back and forth to maintenance court 8 years down the line, and those are the things that we need to change. So if you ask me the question, the next 100 years, can we make it? Do we have hope? I don't think we would be here, and there's a lot of good examples of female lawyers who are working, very hard to change the profession. We have seen a lot of changes. We've seen a lot more women entering the profession than before. We've seen a lot of women going onto the benches, etc. But there's a lot more training that we have to do, and not just hard skills training, also the soft side in terms of how do you stay human, within the sector. Because if you don't remain a human being, then you're not going to have empathy and sympathy for the person who's sitting, and compassion for the person who's sitting in front of you as your client.
I agree 100% with it. There's so many things that I'm taking away from this conversation. One of the things that I'm taking away is that many of us are giving. Someone's giving, and you become empty, you become drained. That you forgot that you also need to receive. So recently my brother said to me, but his birthday is coming up. And I said, so what? I've been giving you I've been giving you guys this all of my life. I've been giving you guys gifts and things. It's time that you also appreciate me. So it is interesting sometimes even our families that we don't think about the receiving part, because we grew up in environments which is so survival based, that you promise yourself, one day when I'm in that position, I'm going to do amazing difference. And there's a lot of please go ahead.
No, I'm saying, and that's the whole message that I'm trying to say, is we don't have to wait for 100 years. We can do small bits. I've got somebody in Phuket, for example, works for the municipality. She's not practicing, but she's an advocate, and she phones every now and again and say, "How are you?" And I think that's what I appreciate, because we don't have to wait 100 years for that, just to pick up a phone and see how people are doing. And we need to do more and more of that. But unfortunately, it is a very competitive environment. But, there's work for everyone. You don't have to, stab each other in the back, for example, to get work. And I think women needs to support women better in the sector.
I 100% agree. So we also have 30 years coming up in our democracy. And one of the things that there is in our current national narrative is it's always been a man who will achieve everything. And woman is on the sideline. But they have an equal role in the direction of the country where we're going. So this is my opportunity of asking, especially with 30 years around the corner. How do we deal with gender-based violence against women and children? And is it going to be better for women and children the next 100 years? Will we survive the next 100 years? Not 100 years, next 30 years, this democracy of ours?
I think we all hoped, that we wouldn't take 30 years to have a better life. We all expected it to be much faster. But most of us have been disappointed by the current state of affairs, and it's not getting better, not anytime soon. If you look at the economy, if you look at the plight of women, I think it's every 3 minutes that a woman gets murdered and raped. Those are horrific statistics. And I see this on a day-to-day basis, not just in terms of clients as well, how men talk to women. I see it on the farms as well. When we started in terms of, as we're working in the charity, you just see how the men give orders and the women are too scared to learn how to drive a tractor because that's a man's job. The man has to do the machinery. And I said in the beginning, I always ask why. And this is similar in terms of this 30 years of democracy. For me, it's sad to see the state of affairs, but, I'm not without hope. I still believe that South Africa needs a woman president soon, because without a woman president, women don't go to war very quickly. Women won't pick up a weapon very quickly. Women talk about issues. And I think this country has been asking for a woman for many, many generations and decades. And I think the time has come for our country to have a woman president. And so that's what I'm hoping for. I think in terms of maintenance and gender-based violence, it has increased the problems. And those are facts that we can't deny. Women are suffering more than what they have. It's fine for the president to stand up and say and make an announcement all over TV to say that he's supportive or there's this policy and that policy. It's the implementation. And if I can think back in terms of what has happened on the farm as a practical example, when we started, women were thrown against barbed wire by the men. The men told the woman, it's not your house, it's mine. I can do with you what I like. And that means raping the woman. That means molesting them. That means using their bodies in different way, giving it to other men as well. And then when they finish with the woman, they do it with the children. And the women find themselves trapped in that situation. I went with several women to the police station, not as an attorney, just as a person supporting the woman. And you should hear how these police officers are talking to the woman, which gave me an understanding of why women don't want to report. Because already they feel hurt and already they've been abused. And now they have to go to these officers who further abuse them and verbally, and there's a stigma attached to farm workers in general. If you go and ask for services, people say, you're just a farm worker, and you don't get the same services because you can't verbalize what you want in the same way that a person who's educated maybe, or the same way of a person who has been exposed to different things in life. And so for me, in terms of I know the Domestic Violence Act has been amended recently to try and assist women better. So I'm thankful for that. We have to see the implementation of that. We have to see more training with an empathy with the police officers who are key to help, getting the perpetrators convicted. We have certainly seen, I've certainly seen like support groups being set up at police stations which, for me, I think it should be a little bit further away because you don't want to see the person who hurt you coming into the police officers. And also in these small towns, these places get stigmatized. And that's what I love about what I do, in my spare time at a charity. It's not it's not stigmatized. People don't know why people are there. It's not for a specific thing. And I think that's what we need to do with the gender-based violence as well. You know, it's both educating men and women. But, you know, I think there should be a higher focus on the women. And we should be asking them, what can we do? You know, what do you want? Because generally when we amend these laws, and, you know, it's people who can write and people who can read and people who understand the processes who make submissions. You know, it's never those people who are really experiencing that. And having done my work in charity, I found that those people have so much knowledge, you know, and can help addressing the issues. So it's not just about you know, how we use the law. It's about how we structure society to make use of those laws, and how do we train the different chains or the different parts of the chain in this value chain of addressing issues that have been there for as long as I've lived, you know, and before me. For South Africa doesn't seem to have the same urgency than what we have for canvassing for the next elections. I mean, I was watching TV, you know, when I have the chance, and I see these political leaders getting up, you know, spending so much money on having these political rallies and talks and all these different things. And I know that a question that always comes up for me is, what if we were to spend the same kind of energy in really addressing and really talking about what are the issues when it comes to maintenance, what are the issues when it comes to domestic violence, what are the issues when it comes to gender-based violence? Because it's not a one-size-fit-all thing. There are many aspects to it. And you know, so for me, it requires the whole community to be actively part of it. And I know the question was around, you know, the next 30 years. You know, I did say a female president. I also said, you know, that we have to get the whole community. We have to educate. There's too many people who are uneducated. There are too many people who have become poorer. We're sitting with a middle class professional people who are carrying this nation through our taxes. It can't survive like that. You can't take from people. I mean, if I think of my own, you know, having come from poverty, now finally earning something to access, you know, bond to buy a house, for example. But most of that money goes back into SARS, you know, and you think to yourself, how much do I have to earn in order to really get out of poverty? And that is really, for me, the kind of questions that I would like to see being asked and being discussed amongst various people. And until South Africa has, like, you know, I always remember that moral regeneration conversations that started and that TV program, Heart or something. It was the start of conversations for the nation. And I think if our president could use the platform that he's been using to make announcements and so forth to ask these questions and to come up with, you know, sort of suitable ways and practical ways, simple ways to address issues like maintenance and domestic violence and, you know, sort of gender-based violence as well. And if he just starts to listen to what people have to say, and not just him, you know, any political party, any person of power and leadership, then we will see a different South Africa. But I think today we have forgotten, you know, A, where we come from, B, we've forgotten where we were supposed to go, because we had good, you know, sort of goals and missions and visions, etc. But we forgot all of that. The key thing is to educate the larger majority. There's too few people who can get access to universities. There's too few people like me, or too many people like me, who have to work and get an education at the same time. And education has become very expensive.
Ingrid, our time is up. So thank you very much for this conversation. And I know that the work that you're doing, how amazing it is. I've seen it. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today. And people, please check Ingrid out on LinkedIn and the amazing work that she's doing on Middelpos Farm. Thank you, Ingrid.
Thank you very much, and thanks for this opportunity. And to the young people, keep studying.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.